The ground beneath Niscemi didn't crack, it unlocked, like a geological vault splitting open. A 4-kilometer stretch of Sicilian earth has dropped 45 meters into a chasm that keeps widening. The creaking sounds echoing from the depths aren't settling. They're warning us that this landslide isn't finished, and no one knows when it will stop. This isn't just another weather disaster. This is the moment when the Earth itself decided to rearrange the map of Sicily. And what's terrifying isn't what's already happened, it's what's still happening right now, meter by meter as you watch this. On January 25, 2026, what began as heavy rainfall from Cyclone Harry became something far more dangerous in the hills above Niscemi. The storm had already battered Sicily's coastline with 12-meter surges and hurricane-force winds, but it was the water soaking into the plateau's sandy soil that would prove most catastrophic. Residents first noticed hairline cracks appearing along the plateau's edge around noon UTC. Maria Lombardo, whose family has lived on the ridge for 4 generations, described watching the fissures spread like lightning across her neighbor's garden. "At first we thought it was just the heavy rain," she told local reporters, "but then the cracks started talking to us." Within 6 hours, those whisper-thin fractures had become a gaping scarp, stretching 2.5 miles across the ridge that overlooks this town of 25,000. The failure line cut through olive groves, residential streets, and the provincial road that connects Niscemi to the coastal city of Geological. By dawn, Giuseppe Ricci, a geologist from the University of Catania who arrived on scene within hours, measured the initial drop at 35 meters. But the landslide wasn't finished. By early morning on January 27th, his instruments recorded another 10-meter descent along a 100-meter stretch of the scarp face. The Earth was moving in real time, and it was accelerating. This wasn't the sudden violence of an earthquake or the explosive fury of a volcanic eruption. This was something more insidious, a slow-motion catastrophe that gave residents just enough time to watch their world disappear. The sandy soil that Niscemi sits on had reached its breaking point after absorbing more than 200 millimeters of rainfall in just 3 days. The plateau that had supported this community for centuries was literally sliding away beneath their feet. But the rainfall was only the trigger. What lay beneath told a far more disturbing story. What's happening beneath Niscemi follows a terrifying geological pattern called translational sliding, where entire layers of Earth move as one massive, unstable block. Unlike the rotational landslides common in mountainous regions, translational slides involve horizontal movement along a failure plane, often triggered when water saturates the boundary between different soil types. Beneath Niscemi's plateau lies a geological time bomb that has been ticking for millennia. The upper layer consists of loose, sandy sediments deposited over centuries by wind and water. Below that sits a layer of impermeable clay that acts like a slippery foundation when water accumulates on its surface. During normal conditions, this arrangement remains stable. But when Cyclone Harry dumped unprecedented rainfall onto the plateau, the water had nowhere to go except sideways, taking the entire upper layer with it. Satellite imagery from the European Space Agency reveals the precise mechanics of the failure. The translational slide began at the plateau's edge, where the overlying sand lost its grip on the clay beneath. As sections dropped away, the remaining plateau experienced what geologists call stress redistribution. The weight that was once spread across the full ridge became concentrated on the increasingly narrow strip of stable ground. Dr. Elena Marchetti from Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology explains the cascading effect. Each time a section drops, it removes support from the adjacent area. The remaining plateau becomes like a cantilever beam, with increasing stress at the failure line. This is why we see these stepwise collapses, rather than a single catastrophic event. The failure scarp now reveals a cross-section of Sicily's geological history. The exposed face shows distinct layers of sediment, each representing different periods of deposition over thousands of years. At the base, marine clays indicate this area was once underwater. Above that, river deposits from ancient watercourses that no longer exist. At the top, the loose sands that made agriculture possible but stability impossible. Seismic monitoring equipment deployed around the landslide zone records constant micro-tremors, the sound of Earth under stress. These aren't earthquake aftershocks, they're the acoustic signature of ongoing movement. The creaking sounds that residents describe aren't settling noises. They're warnings that the subsurface stress field remains active and dangerous. Water continues to drain from the saturated soil at an unpredictable rate. Hydrogeologists estimate that complete drainage could take weeks or months, depending on weather conditions. During this entire period, the landslide remains vulnerable to further movement. Even small amounts of additional rainfall could trigger the next catastrophic drop. Yet what makes this geological disaster truly unprecedented is how it mirrors events from the past, events that were ignored until it was too late. 30 years ago, in 1996, this exact scenario played out on the same plateau, and the warning signs were ignored. Local historian Franco Torrisi has spent decades documenting landslides in central Sicily. His records show that significant ground movement has occurred at Niscemi approximately every 20 to 30 years since the late 1700s. Each event carved away portions of the ridge, forcing the community to rebuild closer to the remaining stable ground. My grandfather used to tell stories about the Great Slide of 1897, says retired teacher Carmela Spataro, whose family has lived in Niscemi for 6 generations. He said the ground opened up like the mouth of hell, swallowing 3 houses and the old church bell tower. But people forgot, the way people always forget. The 1996 landslide created a chasm nearly 2 kilometers long and up to 20 meters deep along the plateau's eastern edge. Official reports from the Sicilian regional government documented the loss of 12 homes and the provincial road connecting Niscemi to the town of Mazzarino. Geological surveys recommended implementing drainage systems and slope stabilization measures to prevent future. The failure scarp followed the same general orientation. The stepwise collapse pattern was identical. Even the creaking sounds were documented in contemporary newspaper accounts, described as the groaning of the earth itself. But perhaps most disturbing are the historical accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries. Parish records from 1793 describe a landslide that swallowed the homes of 12 families and left a wound in the earth that could hold a cathedral. A merchant's diary from 1856 recounts how the ground spoke for 3 days before it moved, warning us with sounds like breaking bones. These historical parallels reveal a pattern that extends far beyond recent weather events. The geological instability beneath Niscemi represents a fundamental characteristic of this landscape, one that has been manifesting for centuries but never properly addressed. Each generation faced the same choice: invest in expensive stabilization measures or simply rebuild after each disaster. Each generation chose to rebuild. The human cost of this historical pattern is preserved in local genealogical records. Families that once owned large estates along the plateau's edge gradually lost land to successive landslides, eventually becoming agricultural laborers or emigrating entirely. The Benedetto family, once prominent landowners, lost their villa and olive groves to the 1897 slide. The Torrisi family saw their ancestral home disappear in 1932. Local cemetery records tell the same story in stone. Gravestones mark the disappearance of entire family lines that chose to leave Niscemi rather than face the constant threat of ground collapse. Those who stayed developed what psychologists might recognize as a form of geological amnesia, the ability to forget natural disasters that occur beyond the span of a single human lifetime. And now, as the largest landslide in Niscemi's recorded history continues to evolve, that historical amnesia is about to end. As of January 27th, 1,500 residents have been evacuated from their homes, but the landslide shows no signs of stabilizing. The evacuation zone now extends 70 meters back from the scarp edge, a distance determined not by what has already failed, but by what geologists expect to fail next. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's declaration of a state of emergency for Sicily activated Italy's national disaster response protocols. The initial allocation of €100 million represents just the beginning of what experts predict will be a multi-billion euro recovery effort. But money cannot solve the immediate problem. The landslide is still moving. Fabio Siciliano, head of Italy's Department of Civil Protection, arrived in Niscemi on January 26th to coordinate the emergency response. His assessment was blunt: "We are not dealing with a disaster that has ended. We are managing a disaster that is still unfolding, meter by meter, day by day." Civil protection teams have established a command post at the town's sports arena, which also serves as the primary evacuation center for displaced residents. The human impact extends far beyond the immediate danger zone. Schools throughout Niscemi have been closed indefinitely, affecting nearly 3,000 students. The closure of Provincial Road SP12 has severed the town's primary connection to the port city of Gela, forcing commercial traffic to take a circuitous route that adds 40 kilometers to the journey. Local businesses report supply chain disruptions that threaten their economic survival. Mayor Massimiliano Conti describes the psychological toll on residents. People are living with the sound of the earth breaking apart. They hear creaking at night and wonder if their street will be there in the morning. Past. Younger residents struggle with the surreal experience of watching their childhood neighborhoods literally falling into the earth. Technical monitoring of the landslide continues around the clock. Laser measurement devices track millimeter-scale movements along the scarp face. Seismic sensors record the constant micro-tremors that indicate ongoing stress in the subsurface. Weather stations monitor soil moisture levels and rainfall totals that could trigger additional movement. The data reveals a landslide that remains dangerously active. Movement rates vary from day to day, but they have never stopped completely. The failure surface continues to retreat inland as new sections of the plateau lose support. Ground-penetrating radar suggests that the slide extends deeper than initially estimated, potentially affecting the stability of areas previously considered safe. Weather forecasts add another layer of uncertainty to an already precarious situation. Rain is possible on January 28th, exactly the conditions that could accelerate the landslide's movement. Even light precipitation could saturate the newly exposed surfaces and trigger additional collapses. Emergency planners face the challenge of protecting a community from a disaster that has no clearly defined endpoint. Unlike earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, which typically reach a climax and then subside, translational landslides can continue intermittently for weeks or months. Each pause in movement raises hopes for stabilization, but those hopes can be shattered by the next sudden drop. Because what happens in the coming days could determine whether Niscemi survives as a cohesive community or becomes another Italian town gradually abandoned to geological forces beyond human control. The landslide remains active, and geological experts cannot predict when or if it will stabilize naturally. This uncertainty represents more than a technical challenge. It's an existential crisis for a community that must decide how to live with permanent geological instability. Dr. Roberto Scarpa from the International Association of Volcanology and Chemistry of the Earth's Interior arrived in Niscemi on January 27 to assess long-term risks. His preliminary analysis offers little comfort. The geological conditions that created this landslide haven't changed. Until we address the fundamental instability of this plateau, we're simply waiting for the next event. Comprehensive geological surveys can only begin once the movement stops completely, but there's no indication of when that might occur. The saturated soil beneath the remaining plateau continues to drain at an unpredictable rate, influenced by factors ranging from local weather patterns to seasonal water table fluctuations. Some geotechnical models suggest stabilization could occur within weeks. Others indicate movement could continue intermittently for years. The human dimension of this uncertainty is playing out in real time, actually unstable. International experts studying the Niscemi landslide see it as a preview of challenges facing communities throughout the Mediterranean region. Climate change models predict more frequent extreme weather events, increasing the likelihood of similar disasters in areas with comparable geological vulnerabilities. Coastal erosion, changing precipitation patterns, and rising sea levels create a perfect storm of conditions that destabilize landscapes that have been stable for centuries. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the current situation is how little control human intervention can actually exert. Engineering solutions exist for slope stabilization, but they require stable conditions for implementation. Attempting to install retaining walls or drainage systems on an actively moving landslide would be both dangerous and potentially counterproductive. The residents of Niscemi find themselves in a uniquely modern predicament. They have access to sophisticated monitoring technology that can measure every millimeter of ground movement. But that same technology confirms their powerlessness to stop or predict what comes next. They can watch their town disappear in real time, but they cannot save it. As night falls on January 27th, the creaking sounds from the landslide zone continue. Seismic monitors record constant micro-tremors. Weather satellites track incoming moisture that could trigger the next phase of collapse. And in the evacuation center, 1,500 people wait for answers that may never come. The geological vault that opened beneath Niscemi hasn't finished revealing its contents. The ancient layers of sediment that once lay buried beneath farms and homes now hang exposed above a chasm that seems to have no bottom. And until the creaking stops, until the earth finally finds its new equilibrium, the people of this ancient Sicilian town remain suspended between their past and a future that continues to collapse beneath their feet.